On planet Earth, you have two types of people. You have people that believe in God, people that don't believe in God. We call the people that don't believe in God, or they call themselves atheist. Atheism is something that really it's a modern phenomena. It started around the 18th century, where the term was first used. I would say that just before that, people weren't that stupid. People were too smart to deny the existence of God. But right around the 18th century, when we had the the French Enlightenment thinkers, this appeal to academia, all of a sudden you started finding that people started losing their mind. I'll tell you what, atheism, you know what it really is? It's an attack. It's hell's next attack on the Catholic faith. It started in the 18th century full force. Yep. I called atheism the devil's gospel, or the opiate of the intellectuals. If you think about it, life without God is like an unsharpened pencil. It has no point. So what are the four classic arguments for the existence of God by the great angelic doctor St. Thomas of Aquinas? In the Catechism, paragraph 47, the Church teaches that the one true God, our Creator and Lord, can be known with certainty from His works by the natural light of human reason. I make absolutely no claim on originality here. This is all based on the Judeo-Christian understanding of God and His existence. And it's always good to have a ready argument for the existence of God, especially since this weird atheistic culture shows no sign of slowing down. So, without further delay, we got Pascal's wager. In this day and age, when the state not only supports but actively encourages almost every form of gambling, but actively and actually encourages it, and at the same time purveys the myth that the proceeds from state-sponsored gambling goes to public education. Yeah, right. It's hard to even say this canard without laughing aloud. So why not bet on the existence of God? This concept, which dates back to the French philosopher Blaise Pascal, famous for his tome simply entitled Penses. It seems simple enough on the surface. Either God exists or He doesn't. However, since we're already in this crazy mixed up game of life, we have everything to gain by living our lives betting that God exists and living a life in accord with that belief. And if at the end of this life we find that God doesn't exist after all, we will still have won, since we have led a virtuous Christian life. Pascal took a lot of grief for leaving the door open for the concept of God not existing, but this was part of the ploy of his wager, in which the player never loses. And Pascal had slipped, at least in part, to the heresy of Jansenism, which ravaged most of France throughout the 17th century, and wouldn't finally be stamped out until the time of St. Teresa the Little Flower. Still, Pascal's wager makes a lot of sense, no pun intended, and it preempts the I don't want to play this game argument by pointing out that it's too late not to. One has to decide to bet either for or against the existence of God, as one is already alive and hopefully preparing for a grace-filled death. Second argument, the ontological argument, or the argument from being. Unlike Pascal's wager, which had its origin a man many considered a heretic, the ontological argument for the existence of God dates back to St. Anselm, who died in 1109 AD, who was both Archbishop of Canterbury and known as Dr. Magnificus. Like Pascal, however, Anselm's argument is deceptively simple. We can conceive of perfection since we live in a world of imperfection where things break down and things go wrong every day. We often wonder what a world would be like. And since we are imperfect beings, we can conceive of a perfect being, which we call God. The clincher for this argument, if God weren't perfect, he couldn't exist. And if he didn't exist, he wouldn't be God, or, for that matter, perfect. Perhaps, somewhat surprisingly, this rather loose argument took hold and held on for so long, not so much because the church promulgated it as dogma. In the meantime, St. Thomas Aquinas would come along with his prime mover argument. But this argument was held for a long time because a group of 7th century European philosophers, none of whom we'd call practicing Catholics, one was a Jew who was banished from a synagogue, rediscovered it and gave it their own twist. It was the non-believing secular philosopher Leibniz, Spinoza, and Descartes. They all wrote about the ontological argument. Still, despite its chicken and the egg feel to it, the ontological argument still beats its detractors to the punch. Namely, if one is so sure a perfect being does not exist, why are you able to conceive it? St. Augustine's poem, The Beauty of Creation, bears witness to God. It's about as accurate a summation of this theory behind God's existence that one could hope for. In St. Augustine's own immortal words, he says the following, quote, "Question the beauty of the earth, the beauty of the sea, the beauty of the wide air around you, the beauty of the sky. Question the order of the stars, the sun whose brightness lights the day, the moon whose splendor softens the gloom of night. Question the living creatures that move through the water, that roam upon the earth, that fly through the air, the spirit that is manifest, the visible things that are ruled, the invisible that rules them. Question all these, they will answer you. Behold and see, we are beautiful. Their beauty is your confession of God. Who made these beautiful changing things? If not one who is beautiful and changeth not." The philosophical theological argument actually predates Christianity and goes all the way back to Plato and Aristotle. Part of the immediate appeal of this argument is that the earth in particular and the universe in general are indeed pretty amazing things. And ironically, advances in science have actually helped this argument by showing how incredibly complex nature truly is. One only needs to turn on National Geographic Channel or the Nova, for an example of this. And the more one looks at cells, leaves, waves, and their relations to the phase of the moon, the rotation of the seasons, symbiotic relationships within the natural sciences, along with discoveries as deep as the ocean and as far as Mars, literally, it's hard not to imagine that a divine architect, namely God, is behind such beauty. Still, the argument for design suffers from the complaint that while the world is phenomenal, it's fraught with inexplicable natural catastrophes, from typhoons to tornadoes, sinkholes to tsunamis, which an atheist will use to point out that the world is not perfect. It is worth noting here that the teleological argument doesn't posit that the world is perfect, but its creator is. That he allows for such vagaries of nature and natural disaster is part of God's inscrutable plan. And the fact that nature has not destroyed itself, but perdured, despite man's attempt to destroy other men and the earth in the process, is attributed to God's perfect vis-a-vis man's imperfection. And finally, we get the prime mover argument, or the cosmological argument. Up until the middle of the 20th century, when Thomism enjoyed a new vogue thanks to Jacques Maritain and G.K. Chesterton, the concept of a prime mover was the classic Catholic philosopher's case for the existence of God. St. Thomas Aquinas took Aristotle's concept of an unmoved mover and gave it a Christian bent, the unmoved mover, the first cause. That being, the being that sets all others in motion we call God. This argument took hold since Aristotle and Aquinas held such stature even during their lifetimes, that it seemed like the only simple common sense that one could not have an infinite series of causes, and that there had to be one and only one prime cause, QED, God, exist. Atheists hiding behind a cloud of computer screens and mathematical equations seem to do damage to the cosmological argument by showing that there can be all kinds of infinite mathematical series. But this is a lot of like saying you're going to build a perpetual motion machine. The minute you start building it, you're acknowledging that such a machine does not exist, much less is in motion, let alone I'd certainly throw my lot in with Aquinas and Aristotle instead of some PhD in a computer science in Palo Alto, California. My name is Jesse Romero. You've been listening to the Terry and Jesse Show.